Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast. Let's explore the top news headlines for today, February 7th. We're seeing some international friction-grabbing headlines today, with South Africa taking a firm stance against U.S. pressure. President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared that South Africa will not be bullied by the U.S. regarding their land reform policies. This comes after President Trump threatened to cut funding over a new South African law aimed at addressing racial disparities in land ownership. It's a bold move for sure, especially with the U.S. also deciding to skip the upcoming G20 summit in Johannesburg.
Yeah, this situation really underscores the complexities of international relations in the 21st century. On one hand, you have the U.S. exerting its economic and political influence. On the other hand, you have South Africa asserting its sovereignty and refusing to compromise on what it sees as a matter of principle. It'll be interesting to see how this standoff plays out and what implications it has for other nations navigating similar challenges.
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a turning point in a way. Meanwhile, Egypt is also making headlines with its strong condemnation of a plan by President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The plan involves relocating Palestinians from Gaza, and Egypt is calling it a blatant violation of international law that could destabilize the entire region. Even the UN is expressing serious concerns, calling the proposal very surprising and questioning its legality.
Yeah, Egypt's reaction is particularly significant given its historical role as a mediator in the Middle East peace process. Their strong opposition suggests a major rift and highlights the potential for this plan to further escalate tensions in an already volatile region. It's a reminder that even long-standing alliances can be strained when core values and principles are at stake.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. Switching gears a bit, we have a developing story out of India where the U.S. deportation of 104 Indian migrants on a U.S. military aircraft has sparked quite a reaction. India's foreign minister has vowed a strong crackdown on illegal migration while simultaneously urging the U.S. to ensure the humane treatment of deportees during the flight. It's interesting to see India also pushing for easier U.S. visas for skilled professionals and hinting at a potential visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Washington.
Right, the situation really highlights the delicate balance India is trying to strike between controlling illegal migration and fostering economic and diplomatic ties with the U.S. The deportation incident adds a layer of complexity to the relationship and underscores the challenges both countries face in managing migration flows while pursuing their respective national interests.
Now let's delve into some cybercrime and financial scandals that are making waves. In Uganda, 8 finance ministry officials are facing charges of corruption, fraud, and money laundering related to a $21 million hacking incident at the central bank. The hackers managed to divert payments, including loan repayments to the World Bank, to companies in Japan, Poland, and London.
This case raises serious concerns about the vulnerability of financial institutions to cyber attacks, especially in a world where transactions are increasingly digital. The fact that the World Bank was also affected adds another layer of complexity, potentially impacting Uganda's international financial standing and raising questions about the security of global financial systems.
And it's not just Uganda dealing with cybercrime. In Nigeria, 9 Chinese nationals and a company called Genting International Co. Ltd. have been arraigned in Lagos on charges of cyber terrorism, internet fraud, and identity theft.
Right. This case illustrates the transnational nature of cybercrime and the challenges law enforcement agencies face in combating these sophisticated schemes. It also highlights the growing problem of cryptocurrency investment and romance scams, which often target vulnerable individuals online.
Speaking of Nigeria, there's also a domestic issue grabbing attention, a case of alleged job racketeering. A Ministry of Labor and Employment official, Takat Williams Sabo, has been charged with defrauding a job seeker of $800,000 by promising a non-existent job in the Federal Civil Service Commission.
This unfortunately highlights the issue of corruption and abuse of power that can plague government institutions. It's a reminder that tackling corruption at all levels is crucial for building a just and equitable society where everyone has a fair chance to succeed.
Now, from corruption, we shift our focus to the Jebba Dam in Niger State, Nigeria, where the uncontrolled release of water has caused widespread devastation. Over 1,097 hectares of farmland have been destroyed, impacting 544 farmers. This follows a previous incident where the dam's water release led to significant rice farm losses in Kwara State.
This recurring issue underscores the need for better dam management practices and improved communication with downstream communities. Uncontrolled releases can have devastating consequences for livelihoods and food security, highlighting the importance of sustainable development practices that prioritize the well-being of both people and the environment.
And lastly, let's turn our attention to the U.S., where President Trump has announced the formation of a task force aimed at tackling what he calls anti-Christian bias in the government.
This initiative has sparked considerable debate, with some viewing it as a necessary step to protect religious freedom, while others see it as potentially divisive and raising concerns about the separation of church and state. It'll be interesting to follow how this unfolds and what impact it has on the broader conversation about religious freedom and the role of religion in government.
It certainly adds another layer to the already complex political landscape in the U.S. Well, that covers quite a range of issues dominating headlines today, from international disputes to cybercrime, corruption, and the delicate balance between religious freedom and government policy. The world continues to grapple with complex challenges.
It's certainly a lot to process, but staying informed and engaging in thoughtful discussions about these issues is crucial for understanding the forces shaping our world and finding solutions that promote justice and well-being for all.
You've got that right. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure to engage in these conversations. It's striking to me how these headlines are actually all interconnected. We see this theme of power dynamics, playing out on multiple levels. South Africa challenging the U.S. Egypt, pushing back against a plan by Trump and Netanyahu India, navigating its relationship with the U.S. while also dealing with its own migration challenges.
Yeah, it's like a global chess game in a way, with each move having ripple effects across the board.
Exactly, and then you layer in issues like cybercrime, which just transcends national borders and further complicates, these dynamics. The Ugandan case with the central bank hacked the Nigerian case with Chinese nationals involved in, these cyber scams. These highlight the need for international cooperation to effectively address these growing threats.
And it's not just about governments and institutions, it's about the individuals who are caught in the crossfire. That job racketeering case in Nigeria is a stark reminder of how corruption can directly impact people's lives, their hopes, their aspirations. And the devastation caused by the Jebba Dam flood just underscores the need for responsible infrastructure development and the protection of vulnerable communities.
Right. It's a reminder that progress and development can come at a cost, and it's crucial to ensure that those costs aren't disproportionately borne by the most vulnerable. We need to be asking tough questions about who benefits, who's at risk, and how we can create a more just and equitable system for all.
And speaking of justice and equity, that brings us back to President Trump's anti-Christian bias task force. It's a move that's sparked a lot of debate. It raises important questions about religious freedom, the separation of church and state, and the potential for policies to be perceived as favoring one group over others.
It's a complex issue for sure, with no easy answers. On one hand, protecting religious freedom is a fundamental principle of any democratic society. But on the other hand, the perception of government favoring one religion over others can be divisive and undermine social cohesion.
It's a delicate balance for sure, and one that requires careful consideration and open dialogue. But it's not just about the U.S. Around the world, we're seeing a rise in religious intolerance and violence, often fueled by political rhetoric and social media.
Right, and that creates this dangerous climate where fear and division can thrive and erode the very fabric of our societies. We need to be vigilant in challenging prejudice and discrimination wherever it arises, and promoting understanding and respect across religious and cultural divides.
Absolutely. So as we're trying to make sense of these headlines and, their interconnectedness, what key takeaways do you think our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the world is complex and constantly evolving. These headlines are just snapshots of a much larger and more intricate picture. But by paying attention to these stories, by engaging in critical thinking and thoughtful discussions, we can start to connect the dots. We can identify patterns and trends and begin to understand the forces shaping our world.
And by understanding those forces, we can empower ourselves to be more informed citizens, to hold our leaders accountable, to advocate for positive change, and to contribute to building a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. It's not about feeling overwhelmed or powerless. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the future we want to see.
It's about staying engaged, staying informed, and never losing sight of the fact that even amidst the challenges, there's always hope for a better tomorrow. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the negativity, when we're just bombarded with these challenging headlines day after day. But I think it's important to remind ourselves that there's also a lot of good happening in the world. People working tirelessly to address these issues, to promote peace and understanding, to build a more sustainable and equitable future.
Absolutely. There's incredible resilience and innovation happening all around us. Think about the activists fighting for land reform in South Africa, the diplomats working to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East, the cybersecurity experts developing, new tools to combat cybercrime. There are countless individuals and organizations dedicated to making a positive impact, and a lot of times their efforts just don't make the headlines.
That's a great point. It's easy to focus on the problems, but celebrating those who are working toward solutions is just as important.
Exactly, and that's where I think informed engagement comes in. By understanding the complexities of these issues, we can better identify the organizations and initiatives that are making a real difference. We can support their work, amplify their voices, and contribute to positive change, in our own communities.
So as we wrap up our exploration of today's top news headlines, what's the one key message you'd like our listeners to take away?
I'd say don't let the complexity of these issues paralyze you. Knowledge is power, and even small actions can have a ripple effect. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that we all have a role to play in shaping a better future.
Beautifully said. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights.
It was my pleasure. These conversations are always so enriching.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and Podcast.